Can you give a big shout out and say hello? Come on, guys. Yes, thank you so much. And, the thing I love, one of the things I love the most about Jesus, how many guys and gals here love Jesus? Okay. One of the things I love the most about Jesus is how smart he is and how that's reflected in the questions he asks. Guys, do you have any food to feed all these thousands of people? And they're like, what? He asks great questions. He says, John's baptism, who's that by? And he provokes the religious leaders. And then he asks, what can I do for you to some blind people? Well, why is he doing that? Because he's really smart. And oftentimes we're at our smartest when we don't have the right answers necessarily, but we know what questions we need to ask. And Jesus asked his disciples, I think, ultimately the greatest question. Who do men say that I am? And the disciples piped up. How many know the answer to this, what they said, what the disciples related that people were saying? Said, some say you're Elijah. Some say you're Jeremiah. Some say you're John the Baptist, which is interesting because all those guys were dead, right? They were all dead. Some say, a great prophet. And then he switched it around, guys, and this is really important. This is perhaps the most paramount question, most significant, most important question you will ever ask or I will ever ask in my life. And he asked it to his disciples. He said this, who do you say that I am? And how many know what disciple piped up? Who did it have to be? It had to be Peter, right? And he jumps right in. You're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. And all the other disciples were like, wow, And Peter was probably like, wow. And Jesus was like, wow, you got that right, Peter. That wasn't revealed to you by man. That was revealed to you by our Heavenly Father, by my Heavenly Father. He revealed that to you. And he said, now listen, you're Peter. You're a rock. And on this rock, on the revelation of knowing who God is, guess what, Peter? You're going to get to influence the world. This is why it's so important to ask the right question. God, who are you generally to all of us? And who are you today, on this day in November, in the year 2017? Who are you to me specifically and personally? Because once you answer that and get the answer to that, then you start to know the answer to who am I? Why am I here? What am I going to do in life? Where do I belong? How do I fit? How can I impact and influence people? It all comes together in getting those two questions out there and then listening for the response and learning personally and intimately what the answers are to those questions. And when I was a teenager, I had such a hard time answering them. I was affected by bullying when I was in high school. And I was extorted by people that were going to be violent to me. So I'd go home and I'd steal out of my mother's purse. And I'd take money. And then I got into more significant crime because I didn't know who I was. And then I got into substance abuse when I was in high school. And I got involved in drugs and alcohol. And then I really short-circuited with relationships. And I had a really hard time with my grades and with my classes. I had psychological issues and mental issues and social issues, and they were mostly fears and phobias. Affected me being able to go to friends' houses. I was a good athlete. It affected me being able to go to tournaments because I had bladder issues and all kinds of issues as a teenager that really affected me personally, and I didn't know how to deal with them, and I didn't know who to talk to, and you would have thought that I could have dealt with bullying issues and all kinds of other problems in practical ways, especially growing up in a Christian family, but I found it so difficult and so hard, and I didn't know where to turn, and it looked like I was a rebellious person, and I wasn't rebellious in my heart. I was just running all over the place because I couldn't figure out, who are you really, Jesus? Who do you really want to be for me? And what is Dave Barnum all about? And after, years of being unsuccessful in high school, I just decided to drop out. And on one cold October day while my family, my parents were down vacationing in the Carolinas, and my grandparents were at our house, and I have two younger sibling brothers, and I was 17 years of age. And I got a phone call from a conductor, an old conductor on the Canadian Pacific Railway. And he said, Dave, I've got a job for you. Well, I wasn't in school now. I had to do some work. I had to make some money. I had to go out and do something. So I went and I was driven off to work on a tie gang on the Canadian Pacific Railway in central Ontario. And I got out to that gang, and I got involved in a culture of hazing and initiations and more violence and more drugs and more alcohol. And it was a very, very fearful context, but I didn't have anywhere else to run. I didn't have anywhere else to turn. So I had to either jump into the deep end, or I was going to sink or swim, folks. I had to jump right in. And so I just jumped right into it. And I got involved in it. And I'll tell you, on one occasion, guys, this is what ended up happening. They said, Dave, we're going to bully you. We're going to get after you. Now, there's no high school teachers around. There's no principals around, gang. And it's like, we're going to get after you. This is what you got to do. You got to take a 5-gallon barrel of water, cold water, and you got to go over to the other bunk car, because we slept on the train. So you got to go over to the other bunk car, and you got to throw that on Wilbur. And Wilbur's one of the biggest guys on the tie gang. He's a machine operator to boot, so he's got some seniority. And I'm just a lowly laborer, and I pulled the ties out of the spikes out of the ties, out of the old ties, and I would be down the tracks and working with my claw hammer. And here they wanted me to throw this water on this big, operator on the tie gang and on the machines, and if I didn't do it, there was going to be some trouble that I was going to have to pay. And so I got the water, I snuck out of my bunk car, and I went into the other bunk car, and all the men in my bunk car, they were all taking a peek down, and they were looking, and they were watching me, and I just went, and I threw it all over Wilbur, and I ran back faster than a cat on a hot tin roof. I got back into my bunk, and then all of a sudden the light came on, and there was Wilbur soaking wet, and he came traipsing over, and he came right over to his brother Ernie's bunk, and I slept above Ernie, and Ernie slept below me, and he went right at his brother Ernie, and I don't remember if right at that moment I confessed to it, because the guy said you can't confess to it. So anyways, long story short, guys, I eventually kept going to Wilbur and said, Wilbur, I know I got to pay the piper here. I'm the guy that did it. And Wilbur just didn't even believe me. And then eventually the guys they all cashed me in on that one, and they told. And I remember being on top of a crane, over top of a bridge, over top of a swamp, and he just chucked me off, and I went into the middle of the swamp, and I was never so happy to be covered in slime and know that I didn't touch bottom when I was chucked off of that. And that was the kind of culture that I was involved in. And then we would do drugs and alcohol and be involved in violence. And I just didn't know where to turn, because I felt like I couldn't go back to school. I couldn't go back to my family. I just got in deeper and deeper. And then I became one of the guys that did the initiations. And I became kind of violent. And I went in deeper and deeper. And then one day, though, and it had to be God, because I did pray to God in the middle of all this. I did pray to Jesus in the middle of it all. I just didn't know that I could know him so intimately and personally like I do today, and like most of you, I'm sure, here today, know him. I looked out my bunk window around maybe 1 a.m. in the morning. It was in a place called Havelock, Ontario. And I looked out the bunk car, and there was a bunch of, fighting going on. And several of our guys in our crew were just really violently beating up 2 men. And I found out that those were 2 RCMP police officers that had seen our guys stealing liquor out of a bar. And our guys beat them up really, really bad. And the next day, the RCMP came to our railway station where we were located in Havelock, Ontario. They checked our knuckles, and they checked our feet, and they checked our foreheads to see if we had scrapes and cuts and bruises. And I was never so thankful to not be involved in that, because even when I was in crime, even when I was doing wrong with drugs, even when I was doing violence and was around the wrong crew, there was something in my heart that was searching. There's got to be more in life. And so inside I probably went, whew, I got away with another one. Then finally I had it with the railway. And a week before, I got a check held back, and I said to one of my buddies, let's just go get my money. And I had been saving money because I was making pretty good money for a teenager. And I was working, like I said, on the railway and banking some money. And I went and got this check. And in Streetsville, Ontario, we decided, let's leave. Let's go downtown to Yonge Street. We went downtown. I purchased some drugs. And I got hustled for the drugs. Another long story short, a guy ended up pulling a knife, and my friend said to me, because I got taken for all my money, another guy, my friend, said to me, Dave, this isn't worth it. So I left there. We went back to my hometown of Orillia, Ontario, about an hour and a half north of the city of Toronto. My friend went on to his home in Sudbury. I never saw him again. And then I was like, now what am I going to do? And so my parents were like, Dave, you got to go out and find work. So I started pounding the pavement again. I couldn't find any work anywhere. And I ended up getting connected to the guys in our community. You probably have them in Winnipeg or in your neighborhood or in your suburb. Wherever you live, there's probably certain names. And I had certain people and certain names that I ended up getting connected with that I would have in a million years. Now, they were actually, I think, part of the group that tried to extort me for money and threatened to, beat me up when I was younger, in my younger years. And I ended up connecting with these guys. And then I took a substance that was very dangerous. And they knew that I had money. And I was going to take my money out of the bank. And we were going to boost a car. And we were going to go right back to Toronto. And they said, Barnum, how are the drugs working for you? I said, no effect. And then all of a sudden, on Mississauga Street, my home street in Orillia, Ontario, on August the 8th, 1980, this whole crew of guys walking together and one person wanted by the police, all of a sudden decided to stop on an amber light and not jaywalk. And this is what ended up transpiring. Now you can say I was under the effects of the drugs, but I know that I heard the voice of God. And God said to me, Dave, you have to go home. There's a line being drawn right here at this moment. And this all happened so quickly, okay? I'm stretching it out here. I'm extending it. It happened like in a blink of an eye. There's a line being drawn. If you don't get out here right now, you're going to cross over and you may never come back again. And something inside of me just sobered up. Now, I didn't tell these guys I was around. I was too afraid from the pressure to even say anything to them. So I was like, how am I going to get out of this? And I looked to my left, and a car had stopped. And it was an old baseball coach of mine named Steve Waters. Now, interestingly enough, 2 years prior to this incident, or maybe a year prior, I can't remember the exact year, I was playing in an all-Ontario baseball tournament. He was my third base coach. I was on second base. The ball was hit to right field, and I decided that I could score from second on the base hit. My coach, Steve Waters, tried to hold me up. I ran through his signal. I slid into home plate. I busted my ankle. The next week we were supposed to go to the United States, where I live now, near where I live now, and play in another tournament. My heart was broken. And at that time, 2 years prior to this incident, right where a bunch of gangsters are not going to jaywalk, at that time, though, 2 years ago, I knew God was working in my heart in those moments. And because there was the running away in my heart, which was indicative of even running through the coach's signal. Are you still with me, gang? Just a couple more minutes, okay? You still with me? Okay, so I'm right there, and it was like, Dave, you didn't stop for Steve that time 2 years ago. I want you to stop right now. Tell the guys you'll go up to the bank, you'll expedite the process, get the money out, and then the guy that's being wanted by the police, he won't get spotted in line, and you guys will be, free and clean to do whatever you're going to do. So I told that to the guys. I jumped into the car. I said, Steve, take off. I asked Steve, just recently, within this year, I hadn't seen him in 37 years. I wanted to verify this story. He didn't remember picking me up. He did remember the coaching decision and me running through the signal, and which I thought was interesting. But I said, Steve, that moment, I want to thank you. I never got a chance to thank you. You changed my life forever. Because we went up a couple blocks, up the main drag. I got out of the car, and I just took off home. When I got home, my two younger brothers were there. We just started throwing baseball or football or something around. I ended up being in my front living room. I don't know if one of my brothers asked me the question, whatever happened to you, Dave? But I remember sitting in a chair in that living room. And I remember I just started to break down crying because I was at the end of my rope. And I just said a prayer in my heart, God, I've got to know you. You have to be real to me right now as you were on the street corner telling me to get home. I'm not making another deal with you. I want to know if you're truly real. If you are, can you come into my life right now? And I phoned my parents up. My mom came home from work. My dad worked a half an hour away. My father came home and I said, Mom and Dad, I'm sorry for the life I've been living. I want to get things right. And I started to come down from the high that I was on. I went to bed that night with such peace, with such joy. And before my head hit the pillow, I said, if you can be real to me tomorrow as you are at this moment, I'm going to live for you the rest of my life. You guys are talking about sacrifice. God, if you're real to me, you've sacrificed for me, I will sacrifice for you. If I can feel this tomorrow, if I can have you tomorrow, as intimately as I feel you right now, I'm going to live for you the rest of my life, guys. That was what ended up transpiring in my life. And you know, there's a story in the Bible. You all know it probably. It's called the prodigal son story. And really it's a story about a boy who just was kind of wasting his life. And what was the response? Who was God? I mean, when Jesus is telling that parable, he's describing what the heart of God is like. What was that God like? Who is Jesus? Who is God? Great question. Here's the answer. It's one that comes running and rushing and is not as concerned about us getting the right forgiveness prayer or the right repentance prayer or just saying everything just exactly the specific way that we might think that we need to do it, because that's what he was rehearsing. And he came rushing to him, which is a sign of how crazy God is about you and I. He's so over the moon about our lives. And he kisses him. And he hugs him. And he embraces him. And he loves on him. And he takes a robe of acceptance. He takes a robe of acceptance and he puts it on. That's what God did in my life on August the 8th, 1980. And he's continued to do it every single day for 37 years. Dave, you're accepted. You're my boy. You're my beloved. I get you. I get you, girls. I get you, guys. I understand who you are. I get your feelings. I get your trials. I get your struggles. I get your pains. I get your ups. I get your downs. I get that you feel insignificant. I get that you feel marginalized. I get that you feel like you have some problems that are insurmountable and that you can't overcome. I get you. I understand you. And I'm for you and I love you. Hush, hush, hush. I got you today. Don't worry about it. And he puts a ring on his finger and he gives him authority. Guess who was the guy when he went back to high school? Every time there was a school fight, I would walk into the middle of those school fights and I'd say, guys, stop it. And some of those that are going to listen to this online, they're going to remember these days when they yelled and screamed at me and they said, Barnum, take your religion, go shove it, get out of the way, let these guys fight. And I was impervious to that. It didn't affect me at all, gang, because all of a sudden I didn't know who I was. I was the extorted and now I'm the exhorter. I was the one that was bound up, now I'm the one that's helping free people. You see, when you know who he is, you end up knowing who you are and you end up knowing what life's about. And that's what you and I today are discovering in a very, very real way. And then he gives him sandals to put on his feet because he says, you're not just servants, you're my sons. And then what else does he do? Hee-haw, let's get the padded cap and let's party because I so love people and I love hurting people and people that are struggling to find who they are and the person that feels insignificant and the lonely person. I'm for that person. Yeah! And then guess what happens? I go back to high school, like I said. I graduate from high school. I become a youth president in one of the best youth ministries in Western Ontario in the early 80s. I have a mentor that comes into my life and he helps preserve my moral integrity. And Tom, I want to say thank you to you. You helped preserve my moral integrity when I was a young man. And you helped get me through and get me grounded. And we want to say thank you today to teachers, to pastors, to parents, to friends that are setting a course to help us, because we don't do this in isolation. We've got to have other people come alongside to really help us, and they're there for you, and they'll be there for you. And then I would become a pastor even before I went to college. I would go to college, and guess what? God would bring the girl of my dreams into my life, and being married to her for over 30 years, having 3 great kids, having a great son-in-law and a great daughter-in-law, having my first grandchild this year, and preaching to hundreds and thousands of people from the West Coast to the East Coast to the United States and countries all over the place. Guys, how does that happen? Who do you say that I am? You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And I matter. And you matter. And the paradox of how we live is this. The way up, For us as Christians, what, gang? It's the way down. The way to be first is what? Be last. The way to be great, gang, is what? Be least. The way to be honored is to humble yourself. It's this gorgeous paradox. God has this incredible life for you. I know many of you are living it, but I know some of you are struggling. And I want to say a prayer in closing. That you would ask the question, who are you? God, who are you to me? Will you be real to me? And what do you have for me to, who do you have for me to influence and impact? Can you change things around? Is that okay, gang? Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this time. Thank you for this great school. Thank you for all the great investment that goes on here from day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. And thank you that it's all about young people. It's all about the young people and about families and about lives. God, I ask you help from the weakest to the strongest in this place. To be everything in you that we are to be in you. And to be everything to one another that we are to be for you and on behalf of you. God bless you, kids. I hope you have a fantastic day. I don't know who needs Lisa. God bless you, Lisa.